Welcome back to the Burnout Club, everyone. This is a place where we explore and experiment with burnout and success. I'm your host, Patrice Panfilio, and today I'm joined by Kate Gory. She's the CEO of GBT Solutions. Kate, welcome.
Hey, Patrice. Thanks so much for having me on.
I am excited for this episode. I always like to tell the listeners how I know the guest, and we met in the comments of LinkedIn. Kate was one of those people early on that engaged on one of my posts. And I think the take was, what is this hedge fund person doing talking about burnout? This is highly unusual. So I want to say thank you for actually engaging because it led to a whole conversation, an episode like this. Thank you.
The community that I've been able to build on LinkedIn is something I never imagined a year ago. I really only got active on LinkedIn like 9 months ago, and I never could have imagined the people I would meet or the community I'd build. So I love it. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, well, that's very encouraging too. Still at the early stages there. Why don't we jump into you? Tell us about yourself and tell us about GBT Solutions.
Yeah, so not the hedge fund world, but I did spend 20 years in financial services, most of those at a Fortune 500 company, although I've been at PE-backed startups as well. And I loved it. And then when my role was eliminated, I realized I loved it a lot, but also didn't necessarily want to do it again. And so started really investigating what my future might look like. Definitely have dabbled with some burnout, which I know we'll talk about. And I realized that through all of my time in corporate, I had built some really good systems and philosophies that worked really well for me. It helped me lead some very large scale initiatives, regulatory projects, mergers and acquisitions. And as I like to say, I wanted to take the show on the road. So I built GBT, and it stands for Grow, Build, and Transform, because I feel like whether it's executive coaching that I'm doing or I'm helping a company bring another company into their fold, it really goes through that same system, which is growing awareness around your individual self or around the problem, building a system that's going to scale, and then transforming the game, as it were, from there. So GBT was really personal for me. It was a system I realized that I had been using in my own life, and I wanted to start sharing it with other people.
Oh, that's wonderful. I do like that acronym a lot. And I always like to ask the guests what the process was like building the business, right? Like, okay, you make the decision, I'm doing this. And then what happens? Like, what nuggets of advice or insight can you give the community?
I'm not sure if the fear in my eyes is translating across the camera. Yeah, it's an amazing ride. I posted probably 6 months ago now about the fact that my mom was like, you work harder now than you ever did. Like it's scary to see how hard you're working. And I do think that's part of building a business is it can be kind of all consuming, especially if you're neurodivergent like me. You can hyper focus and have a little one. I still say she's only 6 at home.
Oh, nice.
So that definitely does mean that I have to find some sort of balance. But I think my advice, and I've shared this with a lot of people, is finding your community and making sure that you have people you can borrow belief from. There have been a lot of times where I have felt like there was no point. I needed to just give up on this. It was not because I'm someone to give up when things are hard, but just because it's hard to keep that belief. I tell people I never planned to be a salesperson. I didn't mind leading sales teams in financial services, but I wasn't selling myself. And so having that community of people that I could reach out to that would help me recenter on my why, would help me, frankly, really did believe in me when there were times that I was like, why did I think this was a good idea, has been really valuable.
I love that. And what was your phrasing? Borrow belief?
Borrow
from people?
belief. Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to write that down after this episode. That's a keeper. And I think I'm going to inventory the people in my life to see who meets that list and maybe kind of bump them up a little higher in the rotation of speaking to them. Well, you bring up something else too, which I know we wanted to touch on, which is neurodivergence. Can you frame what neurodivergence is? Because just in looking at the statistics, I see it's about 68% of U.S. employees are unfamiliar with the term neurodivergence. So why don't you just start with that?
Yeah, which is wild because probably about 15 to 20% of the global population would be neurodivergent.
Yeah.
Although it's hard to get an exact figure, I think especially from our generation and older, there were a lot of reasons that maybe you wouldn't necessarily get diagnosed. But it's really anyone that has like anything like ADHD. They may be autistic, dyslexic, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, anything that means basically that your brain works differently.
Mhm.
And that's how I've explained it to my 5-year-olds is, mommy's brain works differently.
Mhm.
And I've been really open about it. But I have ADHD. And I think in a lot of ways, it's actually been the secret sauce that's helped me be really successful. But it does definitely come with its challenges. And so I shy away from when people say, every person needs to decide how they identify on their own. For me, I don't use the superpower language because I think
Mm.
the reality is everyone's brain is unique. It's just that in these types of situations, there's certainly some people where your uniqueness follows similar patterns. I've gone down the beginning tracks of being evaluated for autism, which can present differently in women, especially women with ADHD. And so I think it's so important that people understand it. There are definitely a lot of benefits from cultivating teams where people have these different neurotypes because there are strengths that come with it in addition
Yeah.
to some of the challenges that I find. But I also think kind of starting with that grow piece, understanding yourself and
Mhm.
understanding where maybe your brain does work differently, whether you have a label on that or not, really then helps you put the systems in place so that you can be successful.
Oh, that's such a great overview. I have so many questions. Well, why don't we start with this angle? I've seen and known a lot of women, especially that are in that category that you're saying, maybe they didn't have any sort of diagnosis or label or awareness of ADHD or any sort of autism, but they're finding it later in life. It's almost like a midlife discovery. Can, do you have any advice for someone that's thinking, "Oh, maybe I am part of that community. What should they do or explore?"
I think understanding first what you want to get out of it. I'm a big person. I'm a big believer in starting first with like framing your situation, understanding
Hmm.
what your goal is before you start moving towards anything.
Hmm.
And so for me, I just realized more and more that some things were harder than they needed to be. A lot of people
Hmm.
go down the road because potentially they want to treat it with medication or any sort of supportive therapies, which are totally fine. For me,
Hmm.
it was really more about understanding more about myself, understanding maybe what was leading towards a tendency of burnout. But also, frankly, I just have an amazing general practitioner for a doctor. And she said, I see a lot of women that have been labeled as having anxiety or being depressed. And then it turns out actually they're autistic or they have ADHD
Ah.
or they're ADHD, which is autistic and having ADHD. And it looks very differently how you handle that. No amount of antidepressants are necessarily going to fix it if you're instead anxious and depressed because the world wasn't built for your neurotype. Luckily, she pushed me for that testing, and I really clarified with myself that first and foremost, it was about understanding myself better so that I could then put the right systems in place. I think also in giving myself a little bit of grace.
Yeah.
I am very blessed. It's just how I was created. It's nothing I did myself to have,
Hmm.
like a fairly high IQ, whatever that means. There's all kinds of problems in the IQ industry, but like
Yeah.
I was born with a fairly high processing power and I
Hmm.
didn't do anything to earn it. So I don't think it's anything to brag about. But the reality is it really helped me mask a lot of the challenges, but then that masking comes with its own cost. So
Hmm.
my advice would be if you suspect, first of all, if you turn around and all of your friends have ADHD or all of your friends are autistic, there's a good chance that you that you
Hmm.
may also have some sort of neurodivergence. It's a joke in the community, but like if you turn around and all of your friends have ADHD, then I have a secret for you. I
Yeah.
think looking for those people that you can trust to have that conversation with, and then just understanding like what do I want to get out of the testing, because a lot of times insurance doesn't cover it. It can be expensive.
Mm.
There's a woman, Lauren Howard, who started a company that's trying to get ADHD and autism testing into the hands of adults at a very reasonable price. I want to say it's like
Oh, nice.
$450,
Hmm.
whereas I spent thousands of dollars out of pocket. If it's too expensive, understand that you can still use self-diagnoses tools and other functionality like that to still help you understand more about how your brain works. And there's plenty of communities online that will help you identify systems that maybe will help you be a bit more successful.
Well, that's great. And I think it's probably important to promote the exploration of one's brain, regardless of whether you think
Right.
that you have any sort of neurodivergence or not. Like, I just, now that I have kids, I have a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old, I just realize, like, oh, I need to understand their learning type and how their brains work. And I'm like, wait, why don't I understand how my own brain works? Like I think I missed out. Like, understanding that seems just like an advantage. And also, in hearing you talk about that, it just seems like my industry probably has a higher percentage than normal of those that are neurodivergent. I mean, the high processing power, right? The ability to spot patterns, I think it's just all over our industry. So having that understanding of, either yourself, your employee base, or your community around you is positive. So I have lots of learning to do here. But one thing that I loved about, I think I saw it on your website, you wanted to teach people how to make a you-friendly environment. How does that fit into what you do?
So for me, I love a good framework. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, it's about having the right frameworks and systems that are scalable, repeatable, and set you up for success. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's literally about understanding. You mentioned learning style, so important. So many of us don't know. That was before I ever knew, oh, I'm neurodivergent. I would tell people I'm not an auditory learner. And what I meant by
Mm-hmm.
that is if you bring me in a meeting and there's no written agenda and there's nothing for me to follow along on, you and I are going to have a really challenging time. And so understanding yourself better so that you can then advocate. Something I've worked with some clients on is really putting together a personal operating system essentially that you can share
Mm-hmm.
with either the people who work for you or the people you work for so that you can help identify how you are most successful. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't really think that's about having others cater to you as much as it is helping set you up for success and also setting them up for success. The more I
Mm-hmm.
learned about this myself, the more I could tell my team, here's how I am going to best be able to be responsive. Like email is such a challenge for me. And
Ah.
so being able to say to my team, if you really need me, I would rather get a text, a Teams message, an impromptu Teams phone call, whatever it is going to be easier for me to understand the urgency and the need for your request. And let's just save email for informational things that you want me to
Mm.
dive deeper into at a later time.
Yeah.
So I think that really comes down to it. And sometimes it's really about like physical space that's most important to you. So understanding the
Mm-hmm.
lighting or the sound or whatever it is, but really helping people understand themselves better so that then they can put things in place that will make them most successful.
That makes so much sense. And I think you're right. At the beginning, you were saying it's not really about catering to people per se. I think sometimes there's just an unwillingness to understand another person, or you don't want to have to change how you operate. But I think if your goal is success versus maintaining whatever you feel comfortable with, then it makes sense to just understand everybody, make that leap. And if it means calls instead of emails or whatever you're saying, like, that's such an easy change when you think about it. You can actually incorporate that pretty quickly. So when you are working with clients, what is like a big aha? Is there something about your framework and methodology that people really connect with?
I think it's different for every person. I do think you end
Mm-hmm.
up attracting people that you will work best for.
Mm-hmm.
That's in all things in life, right? Some of us like blue, some of us like red, whatever fits best for you, and you'll attract those people. I think I tend to attract people who really believe in authentic leadership, transparency, and I hate the term, but I can't think of a better one. So I'm taking any suggestions, but kind of like servant leadership. If you're
Oh, okay.
someone who is very authoritarian and doesn't see any value in being transparent about yourself, which doesn't mean being vulnerable to an extent you're not comfortable with. It literally just means being willing to share some things. Or if you're just a very inauthentic leader, then I'm just not going to be a good
Yeah.
fit for you.
Right.
Yeah.
That's good. So nobody reach out to Kate if you're inauthentic, unless you're considering changing.
Right. If you're on the
Yeah.
journey, I'm happy to walk it with you, but otherwise I'm going to irritate you a lot.
Yeah. I like that. And in terms of, the terminology servant leadership, you're right. I think I wish that servant leadership was just considered leadership.
Yeah.
And that we didn't have all these different types masquerading as such. But now, can you tell me your favorite part about having the consulting and coaching business?
I think it's helping people, which sounds so lame, but it's true. That was my favorite part about being a leader. I had large orgs. By the time I left my last role, my team was nearly 100 people. I had almost 200 people in the org before that, and still knew everyone that was in my team and was really committed to helping their personal development. And I didn't want that to end leaving corporate. And I'm sure there's another corporate role someday in my future. And I look forward to helping people develop if and when that role comes. But for me, it's really about being able to help people be more than they were or I shouldn't even say that, growing into who they were on their own, but helping them along in that journey.
Oh, so
and again, sometimes it's companies, sometimes it's, helping the company launch that product that they want to get into or be more than they were, finding those operational efficiencies, whatever it is. I just love seeing that growth.
I'm seeing the value in that. A lot of times when I talk to consultants or coaches, I can see how they can help you go through a journey, whether it's you or your team at your company, and they can help with that transformation. But it almost seems like with you, it would be twofold. Like you're learning how to build and transform to make sure you're ready for the next level as an organization, but you would probably take internalize some of those changes and just be better off for it inside. So that's pretty rare. I don't think I've ever met a consultant that has made me come away thinking, oh, I might be actually better at everything after going through this experience.
Oh my gosh, thank you,
good.
Patrice.
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting way of just framing it and exploring it. And I know you talk a lot about building those repeatable processes. I am, very much into that. It's a transferable skill, I think you're teaching people. Huh, that's great. So great. I almost want to have a project just to work with you.
Anytime. That would be a dream come true. Every time I watch your podcast, I'm so grateful for who you are and the fact that you're bringing that to a space where I think so much about your personality is really unique and so needed. I wish I had worked with you in financial services because you're just a really remarkable person. And I'm grateful that you're in that space and revolutionizing it.
Thank you so much. I think I'm like you when you were talking in the beginning. Sometimes I'm like, why am I doing this? This is big. This is a lot. Should I just be a hermit and just stay, at my house? But then you find the community and you see, oh, people actually find it interesting and relevant and it resonates. So I think, we carry on as a group. So thank you for saying that. So now, what do you see in your kind of forthcoming chapters? What's your vision?
So many things. I brought on a co-founder and it's so funny because typically I was a chief of staff and I told my C-suite leader, I was like, I'm the string to your balloon. And she was like, don't say that about yourself. I'm like, oh no, I like being the string. I'm the person who keeps you realistic. But I was realizing I needed my own string. Because otherwise I was just like, I want to start a podcast. I want to do a book, but I have started working on a book, which I'm sure
Mm.
everyone's like, no one needs another leadership book, but I feel really passionately about it. And my co-founder and I also both went through reductions in force. And so
Mm.
we're working on a more broad scale solution for people who are pivoting careers
Mhm.
and looking for support. It was so hard. Like you're alone, you have to navigate 15 different aspects, the financial aspect, the
Mhm.
resume writing, the brand building, the what do I do now, the self exploration, and I love a system, right? So I figured I could build a system that would help people through this journey and put some community and coaching around that. So I am the only thing holding back that launch. I'll be really transparent. We're planning on launching that in Q2, which I'm really excited about. The book is more of a
Oh,
longer
nice.
term vision and dream. And then I want to do my own podcast, but
Oh,
I
nice.
think that's going to have to wait. Right now I'm finishing my master's in accounting, which
Oh
is a
my
totally
goodness.
different
Another thing.
story. I know. And I'm doing my ICF accreditation for coaching, which has a training
Yeah.
and coaching component associated with it.
Hmm.
So I promised myself I don't get to start anything new until those two are completed. And I graduate in June, May
Oh,
from the
nice.
ICF training, June from the masters. So then I guess I can pick up whatever my next shenanigan will be.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, congrats on all of that. You do remind me of myself. Like, oh yeah, I have this and this and this. And everybody's eyes are just like, what? Oh, but I mean, it seems like you have the capacity to actually absorb all of that and get all of it done. And the project that you're talking about, what do you call it? The kind of system for people that have been reduced,
We call
the
it
reduction
pivot.
force.
Yeah, we call it PivotPal. I
Okay.
was talking to the founder actually of the PE backed company I worked for
Mhm.
many, many ages ago. And he said his big advice was like inject some fun into it. I don't know if you remember Thinkorswim, but they were an active trading firm and they had this
Yeah.
monkey that
Hmm.
everyone could get, and that monkey really stood out to people, and it injected a little fun into what was at the time not considered very fun, which is investing. And so his advice was to think of Thinkorswim and to inject a little fun in it. So PivotPal, and it really does encompass everything. We have group coaching, we have a community on Circle, and we have education and tools to help people get all the things done that you need to get done in a transition. But starting with the layoff community, I think there's voluntary transitions, graduating from college, etc., but definitely
Hmm.
starting off with the people who have been laid off because they need the most support right now.
Yeah. And is that nationwide or is it region specific?
It'll be totally virtual, so it'll be nationwide, and yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, that's so timely. And I'm just thinking about all of the federal workers that are kind of being laid off en masse. So to have a resource, I think is going to be a bit of a lifeline. So this is going to be a good episode. So feel free. I can put in whatever links you need to for PivotPal. That's hugely important right now.
Thanks, Patrice. Yeah, I'll send you the waiting list sign up.
Oh, already waiting list. Okay. We have to get everybody in there. That's a very interesting project though. And I know you mentioned you were kind of talking with somewhat one of the PE firms or people that you dealt with in the past. So what is it like for you working with PE firms? Because I hear tons of feedback. What has been your relationship when you are at a PE backed firm with them?
I know that there's a wide variety of experiences. It was different for us because they were there was like active passion and involvement in the firm. And so
Mhm.
I've had really good experiences. I recognize some of the challenges that can come in a PE backed environment. I think culturally, the firm that I moved to was probably a better fit just for how I naturally lead. But I think there can be a lot of benefit in that PE backed environment. I do
Mhm.
think it's important to understand whether or not it's culturally a fit for you, because it is definitely I mean, you come from the
Yeah.
hedge fund space. Like
Yeah.
it's a different environment. There, I think like anything else, there's pros and cons because I went from a small company to a massive company that became even more massive.
Oh.
And you have that nimbleness in a small company,
Hmm.
but maybe not as much investment in like leadership development or, the softer skills. But then
Hmm.
as you go to bigger companies, sometimes that nimbleness is harder to capture. I was lucky because I was on the international side at the
Oh,
entire time,
interesting.
and so even until the last few years, so even at the larger firms, I still kind of worked in this entrepreneurial subunit. So
Mm.
I feel like I've had a really good opportunity to see massive at scale growth and also really nimble, scrappy environments. And
Mhm.
I love a good problem. I love to solve a good problem. So I think that's why for me, I'm like, oh, the
Ah,
PE back side is interesting too, because you're always solving problems creatively. And I have a lot of
mhm.
respect for anyone who can start up a company, seek investors, and work through that. I think it's really impressive.
Yeah, I think I have an addiction to problem solving, so that's something that I manage. But I like hearing your feedback, and I think as an activist investor, sometimes we're in similar camps, so it's good to hear feedback on what works. Like you having that subdivision, or a little bit of a bubble made that a much better experience for you. So it's something just good to keep in mind. Um, so jumping back to your company and your solution, is there anything that you want to share with the listeners that we haven't touched on already?
Being aware of the different working styles and learning styles of the people around you. But the biggest thing I would share is like, please learn for yourself. And that could look like getting a coach. That could look like having a mentor. I have built custom GPTs that coach people. And I think, it doesn't have to be a one-to-one expensive relationship to grow yourself, but
Mm-hmm.
just having those reflective practices, I think, is really important. I do think understanding neurodivergent burnout versus conventional burnout is important.
Mm-hmm.
Neurodivergent burnout can be really challenging because a lot of it comes down to masking, which really means like kind of camouflaging your traits or your kind of neurotype. It can be sensory overload, heightened decision fatigue, all these different aspects in addition to all the things that can typically lead to burnout. And it can be really challenging to recharge from a lot of times with burnout. And I don't know, I'd love to hear your advice about burnout, but a lot of times I hear people say things like, well, take a rest day. And that doesn't necessarily work if you're, especially if you're dealing with neurodivergent burnout, I think can be challenging, but not everyone has the privilege. I mean, like I have an
Yeah.
insane amount of privilege, and even I try not to say the word insane, so I apologize, but I have a lot of privilege. And so being
Mm-hmm.
able to unmask even in and of itself, I'm really lucky that I get to do that. And I recognize that that's not accessible for everyone, but finding those ways to manage all of the depleting activities,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're neurodivergent or not, identifying the activities that deplete you and then finding a way to manage them, putting in place the systems to
Yeah.
identify when it's occurring and try
Mm-hmm.
to mitigate it, I think is really important.
Yeah. Oh, totally on the same page. And yeah, I have probably the same amount of privilege when it comes to access to, rest if I need it or things like that. But I found that just doesn't help. If I was resting, then I was just thinking about all of the problems that I was trying to solve. And I think I was someone who got energized from problem solving, but I needed to bifurcate instead of kind of like layering on all of the same things, just, let's say from a business perspective, like I'm going to solve all of these problems. I kind of shifted it to something a little bit more restorative. So maybe I, learn about wine, or I learn about, nature, or some other aspect of it that was outward instead of something I was working on that had sort of business implications, then I found that that was just like, at least it was a little bit of an off switch, and doing tons of stuff that I'm really bad at. So I could laugh at myself. That helped me. Now, I know you mentioned that the, the symptoms of burnout for someone that is neurodivergent is a little different. What about when someone is like repairing or kind of like on the other side of burnout? Like, are there specific steps that someone should take or start with if they are having those issues, like the sensory overload, stuff like that?
I keep coming back to it, but I think starting with giving yourself some grace and
Mm.
understanding burnout isn't just working too hard. It can be. And I think that's kind of what we've associated burnout with, but it can also be working on the wrong things, working on things that aren't giving you energy, or your brain working overtime to process an environment that just isn't designed for you, or masking things like that. And so I
Yeah.
think starting with giving yourself grace and then coming up with some sort of structured system, to your point, to help you repair. And that's something that each person needs to explore, whether it's, some people really do need to work with therapists or with their doctor.
Mm-hmm.
You need
Yeah.
really FMLA time off. And so I don't want to give anyone legal or medical advice, but
Right. Yes.
first identifying what you personally need to repair and then putting in place those structured systems so that it doesn't happen again. And I think, to me, I know people who are multiple time burnout survivors, and really understanding what led you there so it doesn't lead you there again.
Mm-hmm.
Because at least for me, that can be so demoralizing, is getting out of a situation and then not taking the time, and then it happens again. That can be really hard.
Yeah. So why don't we flip to something on the light and positive
Yeah.
side? What is something that you love doing that you find really restorative? So nothing on that list of getting a degree or all that list that you had a few minutes ago. What is just fun, restorative for you?
We're very nerdy. We're a very nerdy family. So going to Disney is a big one for us.
Ooh.
Which is interesting because I do have to manage when we're there, because there is a fair amount of sensory overload as well. So again, it's one of those things where you're like, is this actually restorative? But it is.
Yeah.
We have a cabin, and I use that term very loosely because whatever you're picturing, it's not that fancy, but my family built it in the 70s, and it is just surrounded by farmland. So going up there and trying to be more present. And then I'm a gamer, so playing Switch or PlayStation or Xbox, whatever game I'm hyper focused on at the moment, which unfortunately, because of school, there are no games. I helped my 6-year-old big beat Astrobot, which definitely became a hyper focus situation. But yeah, I think those are the things that I do to give my brain kind of that off switch. I actually work with a coach myself, and part of what he helps me identify is, because of how my brain functions, it can be hard to get that downtime by trying to shut off my brain. Instead, it's giving my brain time to like use my processing power on other things that are mindless and relaxing, but still keep my brain somewhat occupied.
Yeah. This is very interesting because I feel like I have to do that too. Like if I switch to reading, I'll, read half a book at a time, but that's relaxing to me. Like I get to switch. I'm still absorbing something, but yeah. And I mean, just going back to your gaming comment, aren't you so happy that now you can actually save games?
Oh my God. But so and I promise to the listeners, we did not plan this, but that is so almost a little triggering to me, because Astrobot has this level where there's no save points. And so have to beat it straight through, or you go back to the beginning. And that is the level that almost broke me. That was the level that I was hyper focused on, because I was like, well, I have to beat this level.
Yeah.
But yes, I am very grateful for save points. I don't know anyone who remembers the Lion King game from I think it was on Sega, and like there was no save point. And so you just, when you
Yeah.
died, you started all the way back at the beginning of the game. And my 6-year-old played it, I think, twice, and then was like, this is ridiculous. I
No,
don't know
thank
who came
you.
up with this. Yeah.
Yeah, that leads to burnout.
Yeah.
So we'll add in a trigger warning for the astrobot. This has been amazing. I've loved every minute of this conversation, Kate. I want to make sure that the listeners can find you. So if they have more information they want or would like to work with you, how should they go about reaching out?
Yeah, so kate-gory.com. Kate Gory was stolen because, and my parents
Ooh.
nicknamed me Kate because they thought it was clever. My last name's Gory, so they were like, it's category with a K. But
Oh.
unfortunately, category with a K was also snapped up when .coms were, domains were
Ah,
first being registered. But kate-gory.com or kategory.co both go to the same website. And I'm on LinkedIn. I love the community I've built on LinkedIn. I have had to take sort of a strategic pause on posting very frequently.
mhm.
But in a normalized environment, I am posting there almost every day, a lot of times with video content, and love to be connected with people on there.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'm sure you'll see some of the listeners reaching out.
Love
So
it.
thank you, Kate. It's been amazing. And thank you to all the listeners. Make sure to follow and subscribe on YouTube and enjoy your day. Bye.
Thanks, Patrice.